You're very welcome to the Firm and Fast Golf podcast. I'm your host, Shane Derby. In today's episode, I'm joined by Colin Byrne, a fellow member at Royal Dublin. Colin has spent the last 40 years on golf tours around the world as a caddy to many of the game's good and great. We chat about his start in the game under the tutelage of his father, Cyril, his early steps in caddying, and how a planned short stint turned into a career, which invariably allowed him to, at least initially, avoid the Northern Hemisphere winter. We look at how the game of golf has developed through the years and some of the various successes that Colin's undoubted calmness and perspective has contributed towards. It was great to sit down with Colin. We really do hope you enjoy our chat. Colin Byrne, you're very welcome to the Firm and Fast Golf podcast. How are you?
Wonderful. Thanks for having me.
You've been busy of late. Your travels have intervened, but we're here today, so that's great. Many listeners will recognise your name as Bagman Supremo, with more than 40 years logged thus far as a globe-trotting golfing sherpa. Your historical client list is impressive and indeed extensive. Names such as Philip Walton, David Faherty, Mike Clayton, Terry Gale, Wayne Smith, Scott Simpson, Peter Fowler, Greg Turner, Fred Couples, Darren Clarke, Retief Goosen, Ernie Els, Eduardo Molinari, Alex Noren, Tom Lewis, Rafa Cabrera-Bello, and Louis Oosthuizen. We'll assuredly get back to some of your clients. However, I'm interested to start our chat by exploring your early days in Howth, County Dublin. I can only assume that your dad, Cyril, introduced you to the game.
Yeah, unwittingly, he produced an international globetrotting caddy. I don't think that was his aim, but the trouble with Cyril was that he was fairly fussy when he did let me caddy for him. So he grounded me very well in the fundamentals of being a porter, bag toter, and general dog's body, which is, I suppose, what we do in a more grandiose fashion these days because of what the decisions you make these days. But anyway, to go back to Royal Dublin, I was permitted to caddy for him if I didn't let things rattle on the bag, if I didn't walk on lines, if I repaired divots, if I stayed out of the way, if I was there but I wasn't there, which is really the art of caddying, being there but not being there, both physically and emotionally. So, I've got him to blame for sending me on a very long, extensive career of global portering.
He was a player of some repute, I believe.
He was a good player. He did a fairly disarming technique where you think, this guy can't actually hit it. Until you got to the end of the round, you realise he'd shot, a low round and beaten you. I think it was part of his ploy in the same sense that when I worked for Retief Goosen, he was a man of few words. It was a great weapon for him. A lot of people would be intimidated by silence, and I think he knew that. So the same with my father, Cyril. He kind of knew that his swing was less than orthodox, so therefore people were kind of thinking, sure if this guy can play. And then, as I said, he'd probably beaten them after they figured out he actually could play. Yeah.
Listen, a BSc in management science wouldn't necessarily point towards a long career as a caddy. So where and when did the professional caddying bug first bite?
Well, I mean, I used to do it back in the days, as I'd forgotten most of those people I worked for, and actually they're all alive. And in fact, I see quite a few of them. Obviously, I see Faherty because he's on the Live Tour now. I've seen more of him recently than I would have on the PGA Tour. When it all became real was when I finished my degree. It was one of the couple of recessions ago here. There was nothing happening, so I thought, you know what, I might as well head off somewhere warm in the winter and see if I can stretch this traveling a little longer and see what happens. I always vowed to myself when back then you could get student flights when you were under 26 or something, one-way flights around Europe, which were always very handy when you were caddying. And I vowed when I got over 26 that I'd pull the plug on it. But of course, I thought of some other excuse for extending it. So I never stuck by that rule. And here I am at a lot older than 26, still doing it. But when I started, it was an adventure. It was a bit of fun. And, back then, if you actually showed up, you were a good caddy. If you showed up without smelling a drink, you were a great caddy. And if you showed up again tomorrow, they were extremely happy. So, I mean, the demands were minimal. So it wasn't that difficult. And there were way more players than caddies. So it was much easier to actually get a bag. And in fact, you get 2 bags. You could work in the morning and afternoon if you were very keen. And then, it was all very, very much fun. Serious for a lot of people, and it was fun on both sides of the bag. It was a different era. There wasn't the intensity that you have now in golf, and that's what's needed, and that's where the scores come from. But certainly it was way more relaxed, and obviously the rewards weren't as alluring. I was trundling along. I extended a bit. I decided to caddy permanently. I did whatever to keep away from cold winters, made yardage books in Asia, Africa, Australia, wherever it was. Sold those as a sideline. Caddied in all the different tours, Japan, Southeast Asia, Australia, and just generally messing around. There was nothing serious going on. Yeah, and then something changed in golf. People got serious. The Swedes came along. They weren't eating Mars bars, they were eating muesli bars. They were going to the gym, they had coaches with them, they had sponsorship, they had a team, they brought the first concept of a team as opposed to an individual into the game that I experienced. So Anders Forsbrand was my first Swedish player who was a rampaging Viking. His reputation preceded him. He was a Viking. If everyone, I'm not going to say, I'm sure you can read between the lines. He was out there rowing hard, So he was a difficult person to work for. So again, when my father had grounded me in the fundamentals of caddying, Anders was again unwittingly grounding me in the intricacies of dealing with a adult mind when they're on the golf course. So it was my first foray into golf psychology, dealing with, say, the vicissitudes of an angry golfer, put it that way, if you know what I'm saying. So the Swedes came along. They brought a sense of team, a sense of you're just not over there caddying, picking up the bag and doing all the fundamentals. You were more of an intricate part of the team, which was ultimately a support team to get the main player on the team to perform to his best. That was great. I think 3 or 4 years with Anders. He played in the States. Was my first foray over to America, which again was a different level. Again, things were a step up and more serious. So, I was caddying for him. Then along came Tiger. So then, the first step was the Swedes coming along, bringing a structure to the whole concept of team and not just the individual, and your place in that team. And then along came Tiger, which obviously changed the game forever in terms of, now you could probably start thinking about making a living out of it.
We're jumping ahead ever so slightly there. So if I can pull you back perhaps to the summer of 1989, the Scottish Open, I believe at Gleneagles, and a mission you undertook successfully. Perhaps you might explain what that successful mission was and what transpired over the coming months. I'm sort of obviously referring to your hookup with Mr. Fred Couples.
With Fred Couples, yeah. I was working for Greg Turner, and we were playing with D.A. Russell, who had a friend of his, Andy Smith, who was actually a very good racing car driver. back in the old days when they used to haul their own cars around with them, fix their own cars. Anyone who knows anything about race car driving, I think he won quite a few British championships. We're talking about back in the 60s probably. But Andy had, he's from Troon. He had, I think he had a house in California and Florida. He knew a lot of golfers, hung out with him. He was caddying for DA. He knew Fred Couples. He knew Fred was coming over for the Open at Troon the following week and was caddyless. And he suggested to me, given that Greg was not playing, he didn't qualify, I should try and work for him. So through Andy Smith, with whom Fred was staying in Troon, I arranged to meet Fred at 9 o'clock on Monday morning outside the clubhouse at Troon, because he didn't know who I was. Obviously, I knew who he was. And as usual back then, that was how you got bags. You got bags in the car park. There were no mobile phones or emails or texts or FaceTime. So, you had to be there. Anyway, so I was there plenty of time, and I was outside the secretary's office. Now, at the time, the secretary of Troon was none other than Colin Montgomery's father. And so I'd been outside his office, and he was obviously looking at me. I wasn't looking at him, and he'd seen quite a few people gathering out there. And Mr. Montgomery came out and said, could you move away, please? You're making the place look untidy. And I'm going, expecting that. But I said, I'm not an empty crisp packet. There's a major championship here this week, and I've arranged to meet one of your contestants, and he would like to see me, and this is the only option I have. So anyway, we didn't start in a great footing there with Mr. Montgomery. We've made up since over the years, and Monty has got great value out of telling the story to a lot of people. So anyway, I stayed around. I didn't move on like an empty crisp packet, and Fred arrived up, and there I was. I ended up caddying for Fred. We ended up finishing, we were playing with practice rounds with, people I would have only seen on television before that. Tom Watson, he was still playing then. I think Mark O'Meara used to play practice rounds with us. The guy who died in the plane crash, is Payne Stewart, and I'm not sure. I think they would have been our 4-ball every day. I do remember Troon being particularly firm back then, or hitting 5 irons or 4 irons, and I'd done my homework on the course. We'd missed the cut the previous week, so I got to spend the Sunday on it, and obviously I had a decent strategy figured out, which Fred picked up on, and we had a good week. He was in a position to win. He ended up finishing 4th. He didn't have a great Sunday, but then he asked me to go and work for him in Australia and Japan, where he was playing at the end of the year. So I did that. He didn't play particularly well. It was kind of the gravy train going for these to play around the world there to, get a bit of winter money under the belts. So the upshot was I was supposed to work for him then over in the States the following year, which I had prepared for. And I think it was going to Tucson was the first event. And his manager phoned me the night before to say that Fred had changed his mind, that he was going to use someone else. So I was kind of left high and dry. But, good lesson in caddying. It's, you never know. We've never worked on contracts. It's always a handshake or a nod and a wink. And that was that. So effectively Australia was the last time I worked for him. And it didn't work out. Now, obviously, Fred went on to play great, and it was Joe LaCava who actually was the person who ended up working for him. And he worked for him for many years. So that's the nature of the business. Sometimes you win, sometimes you lose.
Precariousness, I suppose, is the best description of that. Now, obviously, Fred had whatever it is. You've obviously been up close and personal to a lot of golfers. How would you characterise the sort of differentiator that Fred Couples, Ernie Els, Retief Goosen, or Louis Oosthuizen have to separate them from other mere mortals?
We usually hit it where they're aiming. That's a big thing.
That's helpful.
Which a lot of golfers do, but then when they're under pressure, they don't. When you're under pressure in the back nine, that's what I think it's firstly what you're employed for as a caddy, You go through the motions for the rest of the event, and then you get to the back nine when their bum's twitching a bit and, being decisive, sticking to your process and routine, feeling comfortable in that environment is, what gets you in a position and gets you over the line. So they're just great competitors, great performers, understood their game, not short-sighting, all the old fundamentals of golf, of which they're very good at doing. Now, I also remember being with these players, and particularly being with Retief, because we won a lot of events together. There's always something that goes your way, as we all know as amateurs. If you have a good round, you need a good bounce somewhere. You need a good break. And then when you get that, you need to take advantage of it.
We tend to forget the good breaks. We remember the bad breaks, but completely forget the good breaks.
Absolutely. That's the nature of it. Yeah, you only remember the bad ones. But, when you do get a good one, you got to take advantage of it. And that's what I think all of them used to do. I mean, and it's just a matter of feeling comfortable in that position. I've always identified two types of golfers. The ones that, if they look at the leaderboard and they're not there, they kind of question why they're not there. And then the other type of golfer who tend to be less successful, the one who is there and wonders why he's there and doesn't feel comfortable. So it's a bit like I said earlier, it's a bit feeling comfortable in that environment. What separates them? Their mind, their ability to perform under pressure.
I seem to remember one of your former bosses, David Fearty. He may have challenged in the British Open sort of mid-80s or something like that. And to your point there, I seem to remember him saying something in an interview sort of subsequently over the years that he saw his name on the leaderboard. He goes, what the hell am I doing there? I've no business being on that leaderboard.
And there's no doubt there's players like that. I mean, and you can identify them, the people who go, once the name goes up there, it comes back down because they don't want it there. Throw a bogey in. Get out of there. I'll sneak up on Sunday and shoot 64, Yeah, and that's human nature. That's how people are. What defines and separates the good ones are the ones who feel like they belong and feel more comfortable and get energy from being there as opposed to feeling intimidated by it.
As part of preparing for this morning, I sort of went back through your Irish Times Bagman column, which you started in the late 1990s, obviously, tying in with your Along Came Tiger sort of period. Just wondering how the column materialised and how the stars aligned that Colin Byrne would be a contributor to the Irish Times.
So obviously we'd come across all the journalists, over the years, and I'd spent a bit of time with Dermot Gleeson, who was then the golf correspondent for the Irish Times, and he and Malachi Logan, who was the sports editor, they got hold of me and said, listen, what do you think of writing a column, And I'm thinking, oh, it's great. I haven't written, my English essays in school were the extent of my articles. So I thought, yeah, well, I'm thinking in the back of my mind, well, you guys are going to kind of tidy it up and effectively write it for me. I'll give you the info, And then I started to realize, you're on your own. So I thought, yeah, off I went, whatever year it was, which you'll remind me of, I'm sure. Wrote one, it was published. I was pretty proud. And then I managed to get another one out the next week and the next week and kept going. And then I realized, yeah, you're on your own and there's nothing more frightening on a Sunday night when you've got to send your copy on Monday of the empty screen and the blinking cursor and absolutely no idea in your head, So I used to try and get myself to pick a theme earlier in the week and, try and develop that in my own mind during the week and have something in my head before it got to actually putting it down on paper. And actually, you talk about the change of times. I know I've been doing this for quite a time, but not that long. Actually, finding somewhere to send an article back then was was a mission in itself. I do remember on a few occasions having to phone in my article and dictate it to somebody over the phone, which sounds like a war correspondent. But that was obviously that doesn't happen now. But that was definitely, not only writing the thing, but then actually being able to find somewhere to send it if you've travelled to Madrid or wherever it is after being in Cannes, the south of France, the week before, and you're, just getting there is a big deal. But then actually getting your article off early enough on Monday for print on Tuesday was used to be quite a mission as well.
It struck me that the best description of the pieces where they were open and honest opinion pieces. I'm just wondering, did any of your columns ever get you in any hot water with the powers that be?
I'm sure you asked that question because I'm sure you know.
I actually don't.
Well, actually, yeah. The tour came to me at one stage suggesting that I was inside the ropes. I should be, they didn't put it this way, but I think in their heads was I should be writing propaganda for the European tour. To which I responded, what do you buy a broadsheet newspaper for? To read what you would like to think is the truth or, propaganda. So anyway, we had a discussion. They said, well, really, we think you should be, I said, I write plenty of positive comments about the tour, but if there's something, something needs pointing out, that is the reason people enjoy reading it. So I feel like it's, it'd be wrong of me to censor it, even though I have to be somewhat careful about golfers because they're the people who employ me ultimately. So, and I was probably more outspoken back then. I was maybe went over the line a few times. And the thing when you write is somebody's going to be offended no matter what way you put it, and particularly golfers, they're incredibly sensitive. So I somehow managed to tread the line with golfers, obviously not with the European tour, but I did suggest they ban me from tour, and if that's what they thought was the right thing to do, I never heard from them again. So obviously they realised that what they were asking was not maybe reasonable. It was a good try. And then actually when I was working for Retief, they asked me to write for the PGA Tour website, and to which I declined immediately because that would have been total propaganda, which I knew there was no way out of. But so I wanted to keep my independence. So so look, when you write, you're always going to offend someone, no matter how sensitive you think you are. People pick it up their own way, and it's a bit like caddying. My old adage for caddying is you can say the right thing and the wrong thing, even though it's exactly the same thing, depending on what kind of receptive mood the person listening to it is.
One of the funny and honest articles that you wrote was in relation to bad behaviour. I think there was a number of players mentioned, and our mutual friend Mike Clayton won't mind me fingering him because I think he was well known for club throwing, bad behaviour, and a pretty explosive temperament. You're right. I don't mind the guys who let off a bit of steam, but abuse that goes beyond that is hard to take. Howard Clarke is one of the worst. Seve used to be bad, but I think his thing is gone. Off the ball is another one to stay away from. Because many of the bad boys of golf have either retired or shuffled off to another tour at this stage. I guess going back through the years, the likes of Mark James, Ken Brown, Howard Clarke, Monty as well. But I think you seem to have a real soft spot for Colin.
Yeah, well, I never worked for him. It's a lot different if you work for these guys.
Like, I understand he used to dine with the caddies. Is that correct?
Oh yeah, no, he liked hanging out with the caddies, yeah. But he obviously his behaviour. Look, there's so many. It's what the game does to you. I mean, I understand entirely, how it works. I think you as a caddy, you have your own principles, your own line of if someone oversteps the mark. Everyone's got their own way of dealing with it, or their own level of tolerance, But if you blow off steam and it works and it actually clears your mind, that's great. It's just constant whining and moaning and general abuse for the day. Plus, it doesn't help them. It doesn't help them perform. So, but things haven't changed. It's a game.
I'm reminded also, going back to Mr. Clayton, there was another article which involved you explaining a breaking and entering in Paul McNamee's house on the Mornington Peninsula to retrieve a 2-iron, perhaps?
God, we probably did.
You recall that particular story?
No, I'll tell you the story I do recall with Mike was we played in Switzerland, and he had, I think he must have had 38 putts or something, but it was his favourite putter. So we got off, we finished in the 9th, I remember, and he flung it in a bush behind the green. Like it was a good old helicopter fly, about 50 yards.
And he was notorious for helicoptering.
Yeah, but this was an old tailor-made putter that he had played very well with. And you look, I'm sure an hour later or half an hour later he'll want the putter. So I scrambled in, got the putter. He went down, signed his card down by the clubhouse, beside which there was a big lake. Anyway, he comes out of the scorer's hut, and he's still fuming. He's still very red, still very angry. And somebody says something to me as a chat, and then he gives it a double take in the bag. He looks in the bag and realizes that putter's back in there. He barges over, rips the putter out, storms down to the lake, and helicopters into the middle of the lake. I didn't go into the lake after it, so he definitely wanted to get rid of it. I mean, and that's what you're dealing with. I know it all sounds insane, but the game did drive these people. I mean, the amount of times you go into the locker room and see broken shafts and things sticking out of bins that, shoes, gloves, hats, there's just been ripped, lockers smashed, whatever. The game is incredibly frustrating. So I understand entirely.
Looking back through that aforementioned client list, you seem to have had some significant traction and success with English-speaking Southern Hemisphere golfers, the Aussies, the Kiwis and the South Africans. Mm-hmm. Just wondering, did you attract them or did they attract you?
I don't know what. Yeah, I mean, I have, and a lot of people would ask about the South African connection. I think it's, I think, okay, this is kind of superficial in a way, but they like the idea of, they might think there's a common enemy in the English, so they really gravitate to the Irish. That I would say there's an element of that. Look, we've got a great rapport with a lot of countries. There are a lot of different nationalities that, really gravitate to Irish people rather than English people. No offense to English people, it's just the way it is. So, in terms of, look, you gain a reputation. I caddied for Retief. I caddied for 5 years. I caddied for him successfully. So, therefore, people think, this guy must get on with South Africans and know what he's doing. So that's probably what set that ball rolling.
You mentioned Retief. I'm assuming Shinnecock in 04 must rank as a real highlight.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, obviously, you win a major is exceptional. To win a major in such a hostile environment is quite rewarding. The biggest thing with so with Shinnecock Hills outside New York, full of mouthy New Yorkers who consider it a football game rather than a golf game, and actually I think the Ryder Cup's coming up in Bethpage soon, isn't it? So turn down your sensitivity dial because it's going to be there's going to be a lot of abuse there. But anyway, look, Retief had played well. I remember distinctly him arriving for practice around the Monday morning. His focus, we'd put discs out where he thought the pins, you have 4 pins. They always put to these different areas where they think the pins are going to be for the 4 rounds, the familiarity, the preparation. I'd put it one place, he'd move it 2 feet. That's the focus he had. That was on the Monday before. No, I think it'll be there. And in fairness to him, probably was closer to where he put it than I put it. His understanding of a golf course, Louis the same, is an innate understanding of a golf course which you can't teach. just understanding what shot to hit, the strategy involved. He sees it immediately. So, there was certainly a sense of he'd been playing great. I think we'd had a load of top 10 finishes early, this all the way up till June, till the US Open. So he was kind of, gearing up that way. He was playing very well, but then he'd narrowed down his focus. He played unbelievable golf for the first 3 rounds. Whatever shape was required into a hole, he hit it with the right club. Putted great. But then putted on Sunday, he didn't hit it as well. He's under pressure all of a sudden, like he'd been under the radar. Even though he was up there and leading, he wasn't the right name because he was South African. Phil was up there, other Americans. So anyway, we get to Sunday. It was a turning point. Shinnecock 2004 was a turning point in the USGA's policy for setting up golf courses because they actually made a mockery of the course.
And it was that par 3, the 7th?
The 7th was unplayable. They had to water it halfway through the rounds all the time. But anyway, so we get to Sunday and I'm sitting outside waiting. Again, how far we've come as caddies. I was sitting outside the locker room waiting for Retief to come out. I'm looking at all these scores coming in, 84, 85, 80, 88, 80, no 70s, no, just horrific scores coming in. Gee, what's going on here? And obviously the course was unplayable effectively the way they'd set it up. So we get out there. I remember the putting green before we went out. We played with Ernie the last round, and putting green was a 2-tiered putting green close to the first tee. And Ernie hit a putt to a hole on the top tier, and it ended up in the bottom tier. And he looked at me with a sense of shock, surprise, and nervousness in his eyes, going, "Did you just see that?" Because these guys don't do stuff like that. And sure enough, we get out there, and the greens are like an upturned saucer patio. But again, Retief was able to. Well, Retief had 23 putts on the Sunday, which will win you most things when you're up there to start with. So, but he didn't play as well. But he got up and down from everywhere. He just didn't panic. He was abused all the way around. They were shouting things at him to the point where Ernie had kind of blown himself out of it after the front 9 because he couldn't get the hang of it at all. And Ernie was going after people in the crowd who were saying things like, "All yours to lose, Goosen," and hopefully you don't choke, and 3-putt, make it. Yes, anything to derail him. What they didn't know about Retief was the more you say stuff like that, the tougher he gets. So it was actually helping him. So he managed to just let all that stuff energize him or just ignored it. So, so, and he had the clarity of mind again. I do remember the 16th, the par 5, the 16th. He had a good drive, could have knocked it on, but the course was so unplayable. There was no point in hitting because the chances of you hitting the green were slim. And no matter where you missed it around the green, you'd no shot. So we laid up with a 9-iron and a wedge. To have that clarity of mind is, just that understanding of, how to play as opposed to instinctively, you can get on it, par 5, you go for it, don't you? Try and miss it on the right side. There was nowhere to miss it. Yeah. So that was the US Open. It was, typical of, as I say, he was kind of trending towards a top performance to have it at the US Open. He came back then after when the US Open, his next event was the European Open here, and he won by quite a few shots there as well. So he was just, best way to be good caddy is get a really good player. The best way to be a really good caddy is get a really good player who's at his peak, which Retief was, and he was exceptional.
Yeah, I guess from major winners to project players, one of the recurring themes I was struck by was, on one or two occasions, certainly you've taken a newcomer who was looking for a steady hand of experience, and obviously your experience to guide and influence them in the early stages of their careers. Tom Lewis and Alex Narn sort of jump out, if you like, as two potentials. What do you think somebody with your experience can bring to people at the start of their journey in professional golf?
Well, you can't beat a bit of grey hair and a stoop back for for getting a bit of respect and assumed amount of knowledge, certainly about the whatever you did for most of your life. So I mean, just steadying hand. I was always fascinated by the fact that younger guys want older guys. I mean, obviously, I know, as you said, the experience is important, but in a player-caddy relationship, you got to have someone you can relate to, because you spend an awful lot of time out there. It's not all golf related. You just need someone you can, And so, I was always a bit miffed, going, "Jesus, these guys got someone like their old man on the bag," which it's too much of a generation gap. But it actually works. That balance worked. In fact, I met Tom Lewis last week and had dinner with him in St Andrews, and he is considerably younger than me. So, just that they know you've been there. They know you, hopefully will help them make the right decision when they're under pressure. So, as it happened, you said with Tom, I worked for him when he turned pro, and I think his third event he played as a pro.
He won in Portugal,
didn't he? Won in Portugal, yeah. So, these guys are good. You just give them, I suppose, a bit of age on your side gives you the confidence that, he has the talent. You can give him a bit of confidence with a bit of experience and grey hair,
At a similar level, I suppose, or certainly the opposite level to winning majors is the European Tour Q School. I think you have at least had two visits there, one with Tom Lewis in 2016 and maybe one with Peter Fowler in 1996.
Yeah.
Obviously looking at our fellow club member, Max Kennedy, who's going through that at the moment. It's a marathon and it's a sprint. It's an endurance test. I mean, if you're doing pre-qualifying, it's 4 rounds. First round is 4 rounds. Second round is 4 rounds. And final qualifying is 6 rounds.
It's grueling, yeah. Yeah, but I suppose that's the barrier they set for, getting you on tour.
So a survival of the fittest then, so.
Yeah, and hopefully getting the best golfers, which, you'd like to, you need to have endurance, you need to have fortitude to play the game. That'll give it to you.
Yeah.
I mean, they're the 2 worst weeks I've ever, not worse, but the most grueling weeks that I've ever done, I think. And I remember vividly with Tom and PGA Catalunya trying to get his card. It was, it was intense, really intense. Because you're playing it's life and death, You've always got next week when you're on tour and you have a card.
Yeah.
Whereas there you don't. You mightn't have next week at all. So certainly the everything is highly tuned, because the consequences are maybe not having a career at the end of it. Yeah. So I think Max has it. Max has that endurance. So I wouldn't be worried about it. And having talked to him and knowing him the way I do, there'd be nothing left to chance, He'll never say I should have. I'm sure he's done all his preparation.
I think probably a good word to use with Max is resilience. He's very resilient and can compartmentalize, a whole from whole, which I think is pretty key in terms of it. And then it's down to the bit of luck, as you spoke about earlier on.
Sure.
Right place, right time, right bounce.
Right bounce, yeah.
Listen, maybe if we take a look at the evolution of the professional game since you started the caddying journey, how have things changed maybe from a player perspective, but also as you pointed out, maybe things have changed a little bit for the bag toter as well?
Oh, well, I mean, things have changed exponentially for both of us. You arrived on tour with a bag of clubs and you didn't have any way of doing anything, in terms of changing them or fine-tuning them. Now you arrive at a tournament with a bag of clubs, you've got an army of different technicians to deal with shafts, grips. Every detail on a club can be fixed instantly. which makes it a lot easier, but makes it more difficult because now you have more choice. It might have been easier back in the 80s when you didn't have the choice. In fact, I remember David Faherty arriving on some practice ground with a psychologist, which back in the 80s was unheard of, and sought out Alan Fine, who had been a tennis player and wanted to bring the inner game of tennis to golf. And everyone looked at him like, this guy's bonkers. What's he doing? He's like, who's this? What's he need him for? And now, of course, if you arrived on the range without a shrink, you'd be considered to be bonkers. Why aren't you using someone? Everyone needs one. So you talk about the evolution, from a technical and mental point of view and the entourage. None of them travel now, any of the top guys, without a physio. Deals with them before and after and sometimes during, around. Always an agent hanging out of them. So there's a big entourage now that there was a one-man band before that, with limited resources. Obviously TrackMan has changed the game. It's become a very technical game, the yardage books, the technology they use. So again, the advance of technology has been embraced by them. And a lot of these guys are both obsessive and perfectionists. So all these things really tie into how they think and how they operate and what they want, what they need what they think they need to perform. So, there's an awful lot of things there to feed their habit, if you like. And in their minds to improve their games and lower their scores.
So maybe in terms of that mix of artistry that you would have seen back in the 80s and then the coming to the fore of more technology and TrackMan, so that very much that data-driven golfer. Has all that progress, do you think, been positive? But have we lost something in the game of golf, do you think?
Well, I mean, you ask, is it an art or a science? It sounds like it's a science. The more you add all those factors into it, what does the machine say it can do? But then it goes back to what happens, what separates golfers, what separates the best, what they do on a Sunday when they're under pressure, which no machine is going to tell you how to do it. And it's as I said earlier as well about how you read a golf course. You see a lot of players get their head stuck in books. You remember the hoo-ha about when they were taking away the greens books for guys who had only ever used greens books and never actually went down and read a green. They're all dealing with it. The scores haven't got any worse. It's done them a favor. Bring back the artistry rather than the scientific nature of the game. So, obviously you can't. How can you say technology's bad? It's the person who uses it, how you embrace it, or how how you can compartmentalize it.
How about aim point and pace of play?
It's a problem. Well, pace of play is an issue.
I know. That's an issue in the amateur game too.
It's an issue. We took 6 hours to play those around in St. Andrews last week. So, things have... Look, as long as I've been on tour, pace of play hasn't got any quicker. And we've managed to embrace that at club golf as well.
Embrace is probably the wrong word, but
we seem to...
certainly yourself and myself kick against it. But.
Well, I mean, people seem entitled to play slowly. I think it's an entitlement. Back in the day when our parents were playing, you played in 3 hours. That's what you aspired to play. And if you're longer than that, they'd be out looking for you. Now, if you play 9 in 3 hours, it's probably not that uncommon. So, how did that happen? Yeah, you have to embrace it. You have to welcome it or see that as the game. I think there's a serious malaise with slow. Plus, you play worse when you play slower. The more you think, for a lot of people, it doesn't help.
Yeah, it doesn't help. No, you're right. Or we mentioned earlier on that you're caddying for Louis Oosthuizen now on the Live Tour. Just wondering how it's been since both yourself and himself joined the tour.
A revelation. It's it's absolutely fantastic. We have evolved over the years as caddies. We've been, the way I put it is we've kind of society was probably looking at our circumstances and going, how can you treat them like that? They need to be looked after better. And as a result, the tours have started to look after us better. But then when I came on the live tour, I kind of realized it seems like they actually want to look after us rather than someone's told them to. It's like, oh, hi, Colin, come on in. What can I do for you? As opposed to, oh, yeah, if you have to, go in there, but don't get in the way, which would be what I'd been used to. So we're very much included. I mean, I can just give you the experience of my last event in Dallas. We were at this
Maridoe.
I was thinking Parado, I was going to call it Maridoe. Maridoe Country Club, which is, beautiful clubhouse. Because it was so hot, we were all in having ice baths, of which there was a beautiful kind of area there for us in the locker room to do it. And, it's just like being part of a country club, and then wonderful dining, and we're all included and it works. It's not like we're in there and it doesn't work. The players are quite happy about it. And I actually think it stems from Greg Norman. Obviously, it comes from the top because there has been a policy from day one to, again, going back to what the Swedes brought to the European Tour, sense of team. If you're working for him, we want you in here. He wants you in here. You belong in here with us, as opposed to feeling like you're outside. And I think that comes from Greg Norman. Greg Norman, I remember well when he was playing. He was hard on his caddies, but he was really good with welfare. He was really good at treating his caddies well, when it came to looking after them financially and their welfare. So I would imagine a lot of it has come from him as well. So, in that sense. Now, then you go to the golf. The golf, these guys can't help themselves but be competitive. I've heard a lot of people say, but they're only out there swanning around the place. You get them out there playing against each other. It doesn't matter what they're playing for. They want to win. So, it is competitive. You may argue that quite a few of them are on the way down. They're still competitive. Their names, is the golf is good. You look at the scores that are winning in 3 rounds. They still got to play a lot of golf to get up to the top of it, It's much better rewarded at the bottom end. So you can actually make a living out of it.
And do you think it's attracting a different demographic to the actual event itself?
Yeah, you have a gig Friday and Saturday night. You've got people coming along that watch 5 hours of golf, then they'll have a gig at the somewhere around the clubhouse. So you're bringing a totally different market to the golf course because it's a much younger crowd. Maybe people that aren't totally into golf that want to come and see whoever it is. Now I'm going to sound like an old fogey because a lot of them are DJs that I wouldn't have heard of that are obviously very special to a different age group. So they're sought after. I mean, I do remember last year for the first time in Adelaide, they had a guy called Fisher. Some of you guys might have heard of him, and he was playing after the first round on the other golf course, and I looked down and it looked like the Glastonbury Festival, and this was at the tournament.
Just for the record, I've not heard of him either. So
yeah, okay, that's good to know. Phew, I'm not. Yeah, so and it was.
Now, mind you, there aren't that many years between us.
Yeah, I suppose. Yeah, okay, you wouldn't be the one to ask, but yeah, so it's a totally different vibe. It's obviously having music is. Everyone thought, oh God, there's music at it. You get used to it. Everyone gets used to everything. What has it done? What's it doing for world golf? I don't know. You can argue both ways. If you're a purist, you kind of go, what's this? Everything needs a shake-up. It seems like, people aren't watching golf, and it's understandable. I don't watch golf myself because you haven't got enough time to watch it. But they're certainly shaking it up. I understand the team thing has been a revelation as well, because obviously our team are the Stingers, South African team. Again, how I'm involved in that, I don't know, but probably the only non-South African on the whole, both the support team and the actual team. But that has brought a lot that I didn't think would be involved in golf, because golf is such an individual game. They tend to be isolated islands moving around the place, but these guys are a homogenous group. They've drawn strength from the team. And I think that's happened with quite a few players. And I think that was one of the big concepts that they wanted to, what makes the Ryder Cup interesting, the tribal thing. What brings different people to golf? That sense of two tribes going head to head. And certainly that's what they were trying to do in Live. I don't know if they got it right. Maybe we'll end up seeing Live play PGA Tour or something. I know there's a game coming up in Vegas, is it, in November, which will be a little maybe precursor to what's coming in the future. But the tribal thing works. People like taking sides and seeing one nation against another. So.
You mentioned the Live Adelaide event. You caddied in that one?
Yeah, last year, not this year.
I mean, that appears to be, I know Adelaide are starved of pro golf just in general, and certainly men's pro golf. Royal Adelaide would have obviously hosted the women's Australian Open a couple of years, if you like, over the last sort of 6 or 7 years, but they're starved at that. And Peter Malinowskis, who's the premier of Adelaide, obviously invested and partnered with Live for the Grange to host it. I mean, how did you find the atmosphere over there for the Live event in Adelaide?
Oh yeah, I mean, it was a football match. It was a riot. It was great. Yeah, as you say, they've been starved of golf. They haven't had anything down there. As a lot of countries feel left out by world golf, in the sense that, and South Africa is another one where, they've just been abandoned in terms of big names and big events. I mean, Australia, you talk about Greg Norman. I remember 30 years ago, 25 years ago, whenever he was playing, lost track of the decades. But, he used to play there all the time. Huge crowds, small events. He was there.
They had four or five huge events. You said the Heineken Classic and the Bicentennial
and they've had none of that. So, they're going to embrace whoever brings a big event back to Australia. So I can understand the enthusiasm, and it certainly was, and the Australians will let you know how enthusiastic they actually are.
Obviously, there's various thoughts on the future of world golf, and you were keeping some pretty high profile company on the fairways of St Andrews and Kingsbarns and over the course of the last few days. But obviously there's a reluctance from some of the powers that be in the PGA Tour to want to sort this quickly. There seems to be a desire for other parties to get it sorted quickly. I mean, can you share any insight as to or what do you think?
Well, I mean, it doesn't really matter what I think. What's going to happen is somebody is going to make a decision, and no one, like the one thing has happened throughout the course of this Live Tour and the recent developments. There was no leakage. It's a decision is made, and that's it. And you can see that by the reaction of a lot of the players, and no idea what's going to happen. So there's absolutely no leaked information. So even though we're out with Jay Monahan, I think Jay Monahan seems like he's, and I have to say about Jay Monahan, he did transform how we were treated on the PGA Tour. He was definitely trying to improve our situation. I get the sense he's a very nice man. I get the sense he's under a lot of pressure from some of the senior players in the States. But there was absolutely no talk. We played with Yasser. His Excellency, he didn't say anything. There was no, and obviously that's what Johan Rupert did. He put them together, hoping that there'd be, a conversation flowing. There was conversations, but none of it about what's going to happen. That's how it happens. They don't divulge any information at all. So in terms of what's going to happen, again, maybe some sort of tribal competitions between both tours, I really don't know. I mean, the fact that they've signed John Ram, it's been successful. You'd like to think they have this it's going to extend the lifespan of the Live Tour. As I say, hopefully it keeps going from a personal perspective, because it's my stage of my career, this has definitely made a massive, massive difference.
And how many events are you currently doing?
Well, I share. So there's two of us caddy for Louis. He plays about 20 events a year, 14 on live. I do half of those. So.
And when are you next up?
So this is October. I'll probably be back at work in March of next year. So which is ideal, practicing for retirement, or you could say retired. It's very good. I'm kind of sick of traveling. So
you'll be pleased to learn we're into the home stretch. Before you answer our final recurring questions, we're going to explore a hypothetical with you. So Colin Byrne has made the Tsar of golf. What are the sort of policies and changes you'd look to implement? You have full freedom to tackle any and all areas of the game. The choice or choices are completely up to you.
Slow play. It's the only thing I take.
Yeah?
The only thing. Yeah, I just think it's...
Shot clock?
I honestly don't know. As I say, as long as I've been on tour, all the different tours, every January you come back and go, oh, they've got a new policy to change slow play. It's never worked. No matter what it is. Like some guys could get fined $500,000. It didn't matter. They still went, here it is. It didn't work. There was nothing that was effective. I think it's just it's a philosophy more than anything else. It's a respect for other people as well. There's a lot of people trying to play.
I'm not mentioning any names, but people are aware of who may be called deliberate. And apparently they have two routines. One if they're not on the clock, and the other if they are on the clock.
Yeah. Well,
so that's a choice.
Guys learn how to play the system. Yeah, it's a selfish game, and indeed they'll be encouraged by, I'm sure, psychologists, because the ultimate objective is to, score the lowest you can, whatever way you do it. It's not to improve society, is it, or the golfing fraternity. So, if there was one thing I would love to see is just people playing just more efficiently, not even quicker, just efficiently. Not dithering.
When it's their turn, that they're ready.
Dither not.
I got you. Listen, second and last question. Given that you've seen a lot of golf courses and probably played quite a few of them too, you might let listeners know what 5 golf courses appear on your bucket list. They may be repeat plays or first times that you have not yet played. You have flexibility here. Where are you going and why have you chosen them?
Okay, well, very close to home here, and we're looking at it, Shane. So no, something's around the corner. That is Portmarnock. And I just think Portmarnock's a wonderful golf course. It's got a lot of variety. There's a great sense of history there and golf culture. And I think it's, there's, the funny thing is, the further you travel, the more you appreciate home. And I look at it every day out my window and go, that's a hell of a golf course. It's fantastic. Go over the water here. Birkdale's another one I've always really enjoyed. I've thought it was something mystical about a lot of the holes, some of them through the dunes. I'm gonna, even though I've seen loads of incredible golf courses, I always get drawn back to links courses. I was lucky enough to play Dornoch. It's got such there's such folklore around it, and then when you go there, it was equally as mysterious. Really enjoyed that. Remember playing a course in Nuwara Eliya, I'm trying to pronounce it right, north of Colombo in Sri Lanka, which was a hill station that the English used to go to when it got unbearably hot. And there was a beautiful pavilion there. It wasn't a particularly great golf course, but in terms of romantic, exotic location. And I was lucky enough to have a caddy, and the caddy was caddying barefoot on the golf course. That wasn't all that long ago. So, a course like that, I always thought was fantastic. Where else? There used to be, and it's actually gone now, I think they've built on it in Miami. There was a little par 3 course that had a massive acacia tree behind the first green that you could actually live in. And I remember spending the winter down there, and we used to go and play the twilight rate in the evening. It was, again, a charming little place that you would never consider as playing, but I just found it great fun to play. And not necessarily big names. I've named some big name golf courses. I've named some ones you've never heard of, but because it's about the game and not particularly the club, is it? So have I mentioned 5 there? Have you enough?
Yeah, if you want to, if you have a few more,
I think that's enough. I mean, we play ones in the States, but none of them I'd rather, than the ones I've mentioned.
The allure of links golf is
yeah, it's there's nothing like it. I mean, they say there's nothing like it, but there is. They tried to recreate it in Whistling Straits. They couldn't. You can't do it. You cannot recreate it. So even going over to Carnoustie last week, the condition of the course. I mean, there's obviously certain pieces of land that lend themselves to being great golf courses in great condition. There's one of them.
And sorry, I'm going to ask a follow-up question there. I know I certainly read some bits and pieces, some commentary from you over the years in the Irish Times with regard to the Heathlands in London. How would you... Is that the sort of golf you like as well?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yes. In fact, one of the caddies said last week they all played when at Wentworth. They had a game in Sunningdale, and it was spectacular. Sunningdale, yeah, sure. Walton Heath, those sort of golf courses. Yeah, they're beautiful. Yeah, exceptional.
Our final question, Colin, relates to golf library augmentation. Any chance you could recommend 2 books for the listeners to consider adding to the respective golf libraries?
The Anatomy of a Golf Course by Tom Doak. Beyond that, that's about the only one. I don't really read about golf. To understand a golf course, any golf course, the principles behind, what designers are trying to do. That is the one book, and it was Mike Clayton who put me onto it. This is one. That's it.
That's fine.
Golf stories and the rest of it, I don't.
Okay. Colin, it's been my absolute pleasure to host you on the podcast. Before we finish up, it's probably pertinent to mention that copies of Bagman 1 and Bagman 2, a book series based on your weekly Irish Times articles, are still available online.
Hard to believe.
Amazon, but I will stick up a link to the same if anybody's interested. In conclusion, I'd like to thank you once again for your time.
Thanks for having me, Shane.
Thanks, mate.
Many thanks for tuning in. We really do hope you enjoyed the show. If you don't yet follow us on Twitter, X, Instagram, or indeed our Substack account, you can do so at Firm and Fast Golf on X, at Firm and Fast Golf Podcast on Instagram, and at the Firm and Fast Golf Podcast occasional newsletter on Substack. Finally, if you're so inclined, you could leave us a star rating or even a review on your podcast platform of choice. It really would be appreciated. Until the next time, happy golfing.